All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into the Proof of Words podcast. I'm, as always, your host, Pat, and with me, my co-host, Matt. Today, we have Florian Bruce joining us. Florian, if you would be so kind, perhaps you can give us a quick introduction to yourself and what it is you do in the Bitcoin and crypto space.
I'm very happy to be here. I'm Florian. I'm from Germany. I think a lot of people could hear that from my accent. And I've been in the Bitcoin crypto space.
Where about in Germany? You're in Berlin, correct?
I live in Berlin, but right now I'm in Hamburg.
Okay. So Hamburg is actually my favorite German city. I love being near the water. I love the, what is it called? The Hafenstadt area of Hamburg. Absolutely beautiful. I used to love going to the fish docks at 4 or 5 in the morning, getting your early morning fish and then heading home and cooking it.
You have an awesome taste. Hamburg is my favorite city in Germany as well. And I will move to Hamburg actually next year. So that's
wonderful.
I completely agree. And yeah, so I got into cryptos in 2016. And I have two passions in my heart. And the one passion is natural science. I studied physics. And the other passion is entrepreneurship. I own an e-commerce company. And when I saw Bitcoin in 2016, it felt as if it would combine both passions into one. It combines physics, mathematics with economics, business. And that was what caught my attention. It took a while until I understood the Bitcoin white paper. And during my physics studies and starting the company, I was quite busy. So I didn't do anything except buy a bit of Bitcoin and do nothing. Then I had an altcoin phase where I thought that other coins like Ethereum had a valid value proposition. After the merge from proof of work to proof of stake from Ethereum, I dove way deeper into the mechanics of both Bitcoin and Ethereum and all the other altcoins and noticed that, in my opinion, basically Bitcoin is the only crypto asset which makes sense and which will swallow up all the other crypto assets, in my opinion. And I turned to Bitcoin only then. And ever since I run my company is on a Bitcoin standard. Our treasury only has Bitcoin. We don't have any cash in our treasury. And in our long-term treasury, obviously, we need working capital. I think that's obvious.
You need to pay salaries day to day, right?
Exactly.
So you convert it from Bitcoin to I know what you mean.
So long-term, everything is in Bitcoin. I have working capital and salaries in cash, obviously. And that's where I'm at right now. I have a podcast also in Germany. It's somewhere in the top 10 of business podcasts. And we have 2 episodes about Bitcoin. One is 3.5 hours. The other one is 4 hours. And these are both the most successful podcasts in my 100 or so episodes of podcasts. So I'm quite happy about that. It's called Proaktiv Podcast, but it's in German. So I think none of the
So
English
I actually,
audience...
when we got introduced by Calvin, I actually tried to listen to one of your podcasts, and I got about 5 seconds in before I couldn't understand anything anymore. I didn't realize it was first in German. Now, I've been living in Germany for 8 or 9 years at this point and still haven't picked up the language.
It's not a shame.
Deutsche lernen, yeah?
Yeah.
I think I even got that sentence wrong. No, so actually your journey is kind of fascinating. And to a certain extent, it parallels mine. I got into crypto because I fell in love. I knew what Bitcoin was. I had invested in Bitcoin back in 2011, 2012, lost $500 on it. And I said, fuck this, I'm out. And then I kind of rediscovered Bitcoin when I was working, or I don't want to say rediscovered Bitcoin, but rediscovered crypto when I was working on the venture capital team at the Deutsche Börse. This is back in 2015, 2016. And that's largely because I fell in love with the concept of tokenization, which obviously at the time was only happening on Ethereum and other layer ones. And working in the Bitcoin and the crypto space for the last 6-7 years, for me, it really has pretty much entirely become about Bitcoin. I had to go through a personal journey of looking at the layer ones, and I'm not a mathematician. I'm not a technologist by any means, but I guess just because I'm very much a libertarian by nature, that's just kind of where my personal compass goes towards. Bitcoin just spoke to me. So I'd love to hear from a physician's, a mathematician's perspective. What was that thought process for you going from the other layer ones, or at least exploring the value prop of the other layer ones, and inevitably arriving on Bitcoin? Because I imagine you probably went on a slightly different journey than I did.
Yeah. So there are a couple of angles with which I saw the other layer ones. And the first and most obvious angle was that every other cryptocurrency has a company which controls that cryptocurrency. And all of them are decentralized.
Like the foundation behind them, right?
Exactly. And all of them say they are decentralized, but if you look under the hood, they are decentralized in name only and very, very centralized at the core. Even Ethereum, I think their ICO had an allocation of 70% for private people.
The pre-mine.
Exactly. And now where it changed to proof of stake, it felt for me as if those people just want to get paid. And since they have the biggest allocation, they get the biggest stake. So in an economic sense, you would say the difference between a commodity and a security. Every other cryptocurrency is a security because they have somebody who can control the supply more or less, who can do a merge from proof of work to proof of stake. And that's something which they all have in common except for Bitcoin. Solana has basically a handful of nodes which are all controlled by Solana. Cardano has a handful of nodes which are all controlled by Cardano. Ethereum has a handful of nodes which are all controlled by Michael Lubin and Vitalik. And so there was an inconsistency for me seeing that they all portrayed themselves as decentralized, but weren't decentralized at all. And then there were roadmaps and everything like that. Then the second point was proof of work versus proof of stake. Proof of work is rooted in the laws of physics. It's rooted in the real world, whereas proof of stake basically creates your own world of physics. And that's what Vitalik said for himself when the merge happened. He said, now finally we have created our own world of physics with our own rules. And I think that may make sense for a computer game, but not for a global decentralized monetary system. And the last point is, which actually was one of the reasons why I got interested in Bitcoin in the first place, was as a physicist, you are used to have everything measured with a constant scale. You measure weight on a fixed scale, which is kilograms. You measure speed on a fixed scale.
Hey, you're talking to a bunch of Americans in here. We're still on that imperial thing.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, you measure, but even your imperial
what is this
system.
Kilogram you're talking about.
So but you have a 1-to-1 conversion from kilogram to pounds is a conversion which does not change. It's not like when we were on the gold standard, it was very easy to do business internationally because every other country was also on the gold standard, and it was just the French franc was 0.02 ounces of gold. The dollar was 0.07 ounces of gold, and was a fixed measurement which you could convert in one another. Similar as I can convert kilograms into pounds, but also speed. We measure speed at miles per hour. We measure distance at miles. We measure energy in watts. We measure everything with a fixed scale except for wealth. And in wealth, for some reason, we started to decouple from a fixed scale and give the politicians the power to change the scale at will. And as a physicist, it's very concerning when somebody tries to.
So I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that really quick, because I think I know exactly what you're saying. But for a lot of people, they'll look at this and go, well, the measure of wealth, I mean, okay, we can talk about intangibles like family, friends, et cetera, et cetera. Let's eliminate that from the equation here. We're looking at just a pure measure of money. Most people will say, well, okay, if I have $1 million or €1 million, I can measure that wealth. I know how wealthy that person is from a financial standpoint relative to somebody that has $10 million or euro, which is what most people believe. It's what most people see because that's the money that they've been used to. So why is it that you're saying that the scale is shifting? Because from the layman's perspective, it's not.
So on a relative perspective, he is correct. It does not change. If I have 1 million and you have 10 million, then the distance between us will always be the same distance. And that, if that would change, that would be an obvious change. But what happens is what you can buy with the 1 million or what you can buy with the 10 million, that changes. So imagine you have a scale, and on the one side you have all the goods and services money can buy, and on the other side you have all the money in the world which can buy these goods and services. So, and they are in equilibrium. And if you increase the amount of goods and services purchasable in the world and holding the amount of money constant, you can buy more goods and services with the same amount of money, which means that your purchasing power increases. Mm-hmm. If you hold the goods and services constant and increase the money without increasing the goods and services, you have more money for the same goods and services. So you need more to buy the same. And everybody intuitively feels that, which is called inflation. If you buy a house today, it costs you minimum of $500,000. If you would have bought a house 40 years ago, it would have cost you maybe minimum of $100,000. And that is exactly what I mean by the scale changes. The house isn't more productive. The house isn't worth more, but the money is worth less. And that's why the houses get more expensive, not because they're more valuable, but because the money is less valuable.
Which those that follow economics, those that follow monetary theory, obviously are cognizant of that fact. But it's interesting you come at it from a physician's angle where in the natural world, and forgive me, I'm not a physician by any means. I took a physics class, I think, in high school, and that's the.
Isn't it physicist? Is physician doctor? I think.
Oh, see, that's how bad I am at this. A physicist. I mean, you come at Bitcoin from a completely different angle. So, what is it specifically about Bitcoin, and I guess that fixed scale of Bitcoin that kind of allures to you, whereas the other layer ones don't? I mean, what's the key contributing factor that brought you back?
So Bitcoin is really decentralized. Bitcoin cannot be controlled by anybody. Bitcoin is rooted in energy with proof of work. These are all the soft facts.
Well, what would you say to those that would argue, because this is what a typical altcoiner will say, like, okay, but you only have a certain amount of Bitcoin miners on Earth, and they have to achieve a certain scale to be viable Bitcoin miners. You also have the mining pools that everybody aggregates towards, and that, I mean, at any given point in time, arguably Ant Pool and Huobi or whoever else, the Binance Pool, they could collude together and completely overtake the Bitcoin network. Therefore, it can't be decentralized. What's your argument against them?
That is an argument which comes from a mindset which is used to proof of stake. Because when you have proof of stake and you delegate your coins to a pool, you physically send your coins to that pool and have no custody over these coins. And the pool controls your coins and can control the blockchain, control the voting power of your coins 100%. Mm-hmm. With proof of work, you have your miner somewhere at home, maybe in your basement, calculating hashes, and you just point your miner to the pool, and it's just an agreement that if one of the guys in the pool wins the block, the block subsidy gets distributed amongst all of them in accordance to the hash which they contribute. So it's a virtual mining pool with which I have custody over the hardware. And if one of these mining pools decide to do something stupid, I will just point my mining rig to another mining pool. So there's no chance that Ant mining pool can collude with Biden's mining pool because they don't control the hardware which is in the mining pool. I control my hardware, and every other miner who participates in this mining pool controls his hardware, and therefore he decides what he does, and it's just a revenue share agreement.
So I love how beautifully and simply you put that, because I think that's something that a lot of naysayers of Bitcoin, a lot of naysayers of Bitcoin mining will point to as a reason why it is not decentralized, which at the end of the day, it's just not true. I hypothesize the only way that you could theoretically see that vector of attack open is if somebody individually ends up controlling 51% of the hash power. Right.
Yes, exactly.
Which is and you have to control that much mining rig, and you can't do it via the mining pools. The mining pools are, as you just eloquently said, just a revenue share. You would have to physically own and control enough data warehouses, or not data warehouses, but you'd have to physically control enough Bitcoin mining warehouses, enough ASICs to be able to hijack that network. There might not be enough money on this God's earth to build up a business like that nowadays. Every Bitcoin miner is doing their absolute best to grow at scale. One of our portfolio companies, Northern Data, is trying to acquire as many ASICs, as many GPUs, as anything that they possibly can, and they're throwing it into Bitcoin mining, right? There isn't enough energy necessarily available cheaply to be able to even achieve that. And there's not enough chips on Earth at a reasonable cost to be able to achieve that. Couple that with the fact that if you play game theory, there's no real incentive to hijack the network, because if you did, you're literally shooting yourself you're not even shooting yourself in the foot. You're shooting yourself in the goddamn head, because you'll have spent God knows how many trillions of dollars to build out that infrastructure to hijack the Bitcoin network, but effectively making it worthless by committing that 51% attack. There's no incentive to do that.
Perfectly said. And maybe one last point, you have a ticking time clock, because in proof of stake, I could take as long time as I want to accumulate enough money to have 51% of the stakes. In proof of work, I only have a time window of maybe 2 to 3 years, because every 2 to 3 years, new mining equipment gets issued on the market. And I need to repurchase all the new mining equipment, because it's always like 100 to 1,000x or maybe 2,000x more efficient than the old mining rigs. So I have a very limited time window in which I could pull this off. And even if I would succeed, there's not a lot of things a 51% attack can do, because if you have a 51% attack, it basically means that every second block gets not mined by these miner. So the worst thing which they can do is make a DDoS attack. They can block a transaction for maybe one block, but the next block goes to somebody else. To really take control of the network, you need like a 97% attack. And even then, you can maybe block a transaction for 10 hours, 20 hours, but you cannot alter the blockchain or anything, because they are still the nodes which uphold the rules of Bitcoin, regardless of what the miner do.
So in that realm, would one be able to take over enough of the nodes to theoretically institute a fork that for whatever change they would like to see to the Bitcoin network?
You could spin up a lot of nodes and then do a fork and pretend as if 51% or 60% of all the nodes would agree, because you control those 60% of nodes. Then the fork will get a new coin named Bitcoin 2.0 or something. And everybody would get an allocation of Bitcoin 2.0. And then game theory is on. And then the holders decide what they do. Will they sell their normal Bitcoin and convert it to Bitcoin 2.0, or will they sell their Bitcoin 2.0 and convert it into real Bitcoin? And this
is why I always say the node attack vector doesn't work. How many forks of Bitcoin have we seen? Obviously the most famous one is Bitcoin Cash, which, that forked in we don't have to get into it, but that forked in a way that I mean, at the time, it kind of worked out. I mean, okay, Roger Ver wanted bigger block size. Some people agreed that was the right way to go, so they forked it, and there you have Bcash. You had others like Bitcoin Diamond and God knows. I mean, even Dogecoin, to a certain extent, is a fork of the Bitcoin core, right? Many years ago. Litecoin's a fork. But nobody goes away from Bitcoin. So basically, to sum up the 2 points we've just made right here, you can't hijack Bitcoin. You can't really 51% attack it through the exahash, and you can't do it through the nodes. So the ultimate conclusion that anyone therefore must have is Bitcoin is 100% completely decentralized.
I would agree. And it's the most secure computer system which hasn't been hacked ever in 15 years, although the incentive to hack it is quite high. Imagine you could hack Satoshi's wallet. You would get 1 million Bitcoins on the spot. That's, I don't know, $30 billion or something. It's quite the bounty for somebody to hack this wallet. And I think it's way easier to hack a proof of stake system with unlimited money, with unlimited AI power, but it's not possible to do that with Bitcoin because it is partly rooted in the real world with energy, and that's the beauty of Bitcoin in my mind.
So one of the biggest pushbacks against Bitcoin is its tie to the real world, is its energy consumption. You're a physicist. Is this something that overly concerns you, or is this something that you think is more of a feature rather than a bug in the Bitcoin ecosystem?
I think it's one of the biggest features. And people who argue that point, they argue that point because if you look on the surface, it sounds very coherent what they say. How is it that a monetary system uses so much energy where we are in a world with climate crisis and who knows what?
It uses more energy than Denmark, right?
Exactly. And that sounds spectacular. But as a physicist, it's pretty obvious we don't have an energy scarcity on the planet. We just have the problem that energy is at the wrong places on the planet. And we have a lot of geothermal energy all over the world. We have a lot of hydropower energy all over the world. We have a lot of solar power all over the world, but it's at the wrong places. And with any form of energy, it's always the question, how can we send it over space and how can we send it over time? And to send it over time, you need a battery. And to send it over space, meaning from the Sahara from the Sahara, where we have a lot of sun, to New York, requires a lot of transport mechanisms, which are very, very, very expensive and not feasible at the moment at large scales. So
it costs a lot of energy to transfer that energy.
Exactly,
then too,
more
right?
energy. Exactly. So we have the problem that the energy is not at the right places. And the energy and places where energy is abundant, this energy cannot be utilized because it cannot be transported. And that is basically the energy which Bitcoin miners utilize. They would never compete with real consumers on the normal grid because it would be way more expensive even for a Bitcoin miner to compete with real consumers if they could also go to sub-Sahara Africa or to Iceland or to El Salvador and mine with the volcanoes. And so the energy which is used from Bitcoin is mostly energy which would not have been used at any other point in time ever. That is one point, but there are a few other points as well. And one point
I think a good example here is one of the most successful Bitcoin mining outfits on Earth is BitRiver. Based out of Siberia, right? They use excess hydraulic capacity at one of the largest dams on Earth. I actually think if it's not the largest dam, I think it is it is the second largest, if memory serves correct. I remember meeting the CEO of it a few years ago. And basically they just have a profit sharing agreement with the hydraulic, whoever it is that manages that facility, that whenever there's an excess capacity, BitRiver turns on their rigs. They help regulate the grid. And for energy that was going to be produced and not consumed anyway. So this energy was going to be produced. The resources were going to be used. And mind you, this is a 100% sustainable energy resource, being a hydraulic dam. They're just converting it purely in a profit sharing agreement into Bitcoin. I mean, that just sounds like an amazing use case, right? And when you talk about what's happening in Texas with the maintenance of the smart grids, I mean, you're a physicist. You can explain it infinitely better than I can. That seems like a huge net positive for anybody that would be on the environmentalist side, right? I mean, maybe you can elaborate on how that works.
I would love to. So Texas, if you have a grid, you have the same mechanics of supply and demand as in every market. And you cannot build the grid infinitely big, because then you always run on low capacity, and that is basically money waste. You cannot build the grid too small, because when you have a spike in demand, your grid is overheated and you cannot supply the demand. So it's a very hard balancing
and then you have
to
blackouts,
build.
basically, right?
Exactly. And then you have blackouts. Exactly. And now with Bitcoin, you can build the grid as big as you want, because all the excess energy which cannot be used because the grid is too big can be now used with Bitcoin mining, and it can generate a profit. So it subsidizes the big grid. And when you have a demand spike, as in Texas in summer, where everybody turns on their AC conditions, air conditions, you can reduce the Bitcoin mining part and increase the normal operating part, and the grid works very, very smoothly. So Bitcoin is basically a subsidy for energy which cannot be used, and once the energy is needed on the spot, Bitcoin can be turned off immediately. And for everybody who's not in the energy market, there's no other technology which can take so much energy on demand and then can be turned off whenever it needs to be turned off. You cannot put a nuclear powered something and feed it with the energy, because it cannot be turned off very quickly. So that's the first technology which is
I mean, the nuclear rods can't be turned off ever.
Exactly.
They can only just be hidden under under God knows how much cement, right?
Exactly. So if I would be an environmentalist, and if I wanted to say, okay, let's build a lot of wind farms, a lot of solar panels and everything, Bitcoin basically is the savior. Because if you want to build everything with solar, you have times where the sun is so hot, not hot, where the sun is shining so much that you have too much energy which you cannot distribute. And with Bitcoin, you can monetize this energy so that the solar panels get subsidized. And when you have no sun, then when you have a lot of solar panels, because you can subsidize them with Bitcoin, and then there's a lesser intensity of the sun, it will still suffice to provide enough energy needed. So for me, Bitcoin is the biggest enabler for renewable energies. It's the biggest stabilizer for grids, and it uses energy which is not being used anywhere else. So for me, it's energy positive.
So, I mean, I always say, and I get ridiculed for this constantly, I mean, if you're into the ESG sort of thing, which at the end of the day, I don't think there's anyone on earth that fundamentally disagrees with what the ESG movement is trying to accomplish. I mean, I think everyone can agree, okay, we want to do stuff that is environmentally friendly. We don't want to damage our environment. We obviously want to make sure that there is social accountability for products and services or whatever it is that we produce. And while governance is a very abstract concept, I think everybody can agree that we want proper governance procedures. And right now we're kind of fixated on democracy being the end all be all of governance, but that's neither here nor there. I think everybody agrees that these are outcomes humanity probably wants to collectively achieve together. But I think what most people disagree with is the manner in which the ESG movement is trying to do this. Now, what I always say is, regardless of what your view is on ESG, Bitcoin, to me, is far and away the most ESG friendly investment.
I agree.
And I mean, so I'm not even, the biggest problem I think the ESG movement has is it hyper focuses on the E part of it. It only really focuses on the environmental aspect of it, which, okay, neither here nor there. But Bitcoin has the perfect mathematical and transparent governance model over its monetary system, having censorship resistant peer-to-peer e-cash outside of the hands of government manipulated money. Okay, if you disagree and think that government money is better, then we're going to just have a fundamental, we're going to have to agree to disagree on which one is better for society. But for me, the S is completely covered by Bitcoin over fiat or anything else. And then the environmental side of things, this is actually where I think it gets interesting, because exactly the points that you just made, Bitcoin theoretically should be a tool that those that are environmentalists or even politicians that are more on the left side, because usually this is something that speaks more to Democrats or people on the left, progressives, it should be used as a tool that can ultimately create the most environmentally friendly, sustainable, renewable resource generation that anybody's ever been able to do in humanity. I mean, Bitcoin is the ultimate incentive to create a cheap, renewable energy source. And for the life of me, I don't understand why certain progressives don't see that. All they see is, oh, it uses more energy than Denmark, therefore it's bad, right? They don't go past that. And I was actually out to dinner one night. I mean, I recently just moved to San Francisco. And obviously, San Fran is notoriously more on the left side. So I was out to dinner with another Bitcoiner. And I mean, he's obviously a little bit more left than I am. I think most everybody's a little bit more left than I am. But anyways, we're being completely honest. But we were having a conversation and he just kept harking on like, yeah, I believe in Bitcoin because of what it does for financial inclusion. Okay, fantastic. But he hates Bitcoin for its energy consumption. And him and I started having a conversation. I brought up pretty much exactly these points. And I started talking about what it's doing in Texas, maintaining the integrity of the grid. And he started going down on a tangent that I had never even really conceived of before. He was like, well, okay, what does that mean? Could that be used for UBI, universal basic income? Now, when I hear those words, I immediately turn off. UBI for me is just a horrifying concept. The idea of governments giving money to individuals for whatever reason, for no purpose at all. I'm just fundamentally against that. But then he brought up a point which I hadn't comprehended. I mean, we are, I think, all familiar with the one UBI program, at least that I can reference, that has been wildly successful on Earth, and that's Alaska. Most citizens in Alaska, if not every resident of Alaska, and I might be getting this slightly wrong, so I'm paraphrasing here, they are entitled to a revenue share, a profit share from the oil reserves that are harvested in Alaska, every resident of Alaska. So they get a paycheck month to month for the resources their state contributes to the world. Okay, I mean, that doesn't really sound like UBI. It sounds like a free market. And hey, if you're going to allow people to come in to harvest the resources that are on my property, on my land, or a part of my state, I mean, I don't necessarily consider that UBI so much as it is a free market enterprise that, hey, I'm happening to contribute something to and participating in. I remember I have a lot of family from Pittsburgh. And I remember 10, 15 or so years ago when fracking really became a thing, everybody in Pittsburgh was against fracking. Nobody wanted what everybody was talking about related to sludge in the water, all of the runoff, the noise, blah, 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 blah. But hey, once those checks started rolling in because oil was being usurped or energy was being usurped from tens of thousands of feet below their property, and hey, they made money off of it, everybody loves fracking. It was amazing. I look at this and say, well, okay, if you can collectively, as a small society, you're a local town or whatever, and you have an energy grid, and you contribute tax resources, tax dollars from that local society to help build out the infrastructure necessary to help maintain the integrity of your own smart grid. So there is a cognitive way that you can decide that Bitcoin should be used. Bitcoin infrastructure could be argued to need tax dollars to help maintain the integrity of your local grid. But hey, that Bitcoin infrastructure that your tax dollars were used for becomes a profit distribution for the locals that contributed the taxes to build it, to maintain the integrity of the grid. I mean, that kind of pseudo becomes a UBI for that locality based off of the profits of that Bitcoin mining, again, maintaining the integrity of that grid. And I had never really thought about it that far. This individual did. And I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, it doesn't look like UBI. It looks like, I mean, it is effectively because it's giving distributions to the locals, but I mean, the locals are providing their resources.
They pay, yeah.
Exactly. So I'm thinking, okay, that might be a good way for private markets to institute what could look like a UBI. And for the life of me, I can't find an argument against it. So, I mean, it seems like an interesting concept.
I'm very impressed by what you just said and what your friend said, because actually yesterday I was in my hometown, a small town near Hamburg, and there's they're voting for a new mayor. And I was just driving past one of the posters, and I was thinking, what would I do if I was mayor in this town? And I immediately started thinking of, okay, maybe mining Bitcoin, blah, blah, blah. But then I shut down this thought because I thought, okay, everybody would try to vote me out of office after I start talking about Bitcoin and mining
Probably,
Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But if I tell them it's an investment in our energy grid with tax dollars and the return gets redistributed to all the citizens of the town, this would be a whole nother concept. I'm very, when we close this interview, I will think a bit more about that. I think that's awesome.
So, I mean, I'm not sure it's the right answer. I've only ever thought about this kind of superficially at a high level. But for me, it sounds like a reasonable venture that, I mean, at least there should be somebody that studies it. I'm sure somebody already has, but I mean, it like rather than, I mean, you could incentivize. I mean, imagine if you had private Bitcoin mining corporations or private Bitcoin operations that come in because they have the know-how, they have the experience, they have the professional experience managing the ASICs, managing these Bitcoin mining warehouses. There's a revenue share agreement that the local government strikes with them. There's money put in by the Bitcoin mining group. There's money put in by the taxpayers, which, okay, sometimes that doesn't work out. Like just look at stadiums in the NFL or the MLB where there's a joint investment agreement between the city and the owner of whatever that sports team is. Sometimes it doesn't work out. But there might be a way that you can strike a balance between private and public money. It maintains the balance of the grid, which we can all agree is a good thing to try to accomplish. That is a societal good that maybe the government should be involved in. And it creates a monetary payment, or maybe not even a monetary payment. It can also just be a reduction in taxes. I mean, imagine if instead of having your local and state taxes, you have zero because, hey, the Bitcoin mining funds the local government. I mean, it just seems so intuitive to pursue this. And I just don't understand why. Like, this is where I have a huge problem with politicians, and particularly those that would identify as being left or progressive. They only look at the very surface problem. And the very surface problem is Bitcoin uses a lot of energy. They don't look past that and go, okay, it uses a lot of energy. On the scale of global energy production, it's minuscule. It's next to nothing. But how could we harvest that in a way that actually helps our constituents? And when you actually start thinking about the layer 2, layer 3 effects of that energy consumption, you can see how much of a benefit it would be for anybody locally.
I agree. I think mining is very competitive. So it may be that the returns are very low. And you also need to increase the grid first so that mining can be done without impairing the consumers of the grid at the moment.
Yeah.
So there are a few challenges with it, but it's definitely a thought worth thinking further.
Like I said, I've only thought about it superficially, and my very untrained physics mind, I only know anything about energy grids purely based on what I know superficially about Bitcoin mining. So I would never claim to be an expert, and I might have just spouted complete goddamn nonsense for the last 15 minutes. But it just, from an economics perspective, which is where my background is, it just makes perfect sense to me. So, I mean, what are some of the things that we can do to really kind of educate the powers that be or the voters that be on what that value add of Bitcoin can be? How do we reframe the argument in our favor?
That's a good question. So I think on a biological level, there are only two things which are intrinsic in us, which force us to learn stuff. And number one is necessity. So in the third world, people will understand Bitcoin way quicker than in the first world. People in El Salvador will understand Bitcoin quicker. People in Ukraine understood Bitcoin quicker. People, if you look at the adoption of Bitcoin, of crypto worldwide, it is adopted. The highest adoption rate is in countries which are all in the third world. And I think USA is place number 5. Vietnam, Philippines. And I think that's number one, necessity. And I hope it does not get so far that even in the first world, we will have the necessity for it. And the second one is greed. And I think greed is spurred on by higher prices. And my strategy is do a lot of content
there was a wise man
right
that
now.
Once said greed is good.
Well, yeah, greed is good if channeled correctly. And I think the chances are high that we will see a lot of price action in the future for Bitcoin, which is not financial advice. It's just my opinion. Seeing the ETF, seeing the new FASB rules and all of that. And I think when Bitcoin reaches new highs, people will get interested in it again. And then the cycle continues and people will then listen to podcasts like this and hopefully come for the greed, but stay for different reasons, which are environmental reasons, which are social reasons, which are governance reasons, which are ideological reasons, which are theological reasons. There are a lot of people who can view Bitcoin from different angles and all come to the same conclusion.
I mean, Bitcoin is something different, I think, to everybody else. I mean, Bitcoin for me was that censorship-resistant e-cash that cannot be manipulated by the government. So as a libertarian, that's how I found Bitcoin. That's what identified with me. You, being the physician, you looked at it and said, okay, I identify with this because it has a finite supply. It's finite coded mathematics with tangible ties. It's digital money, sure, but it has tangible ties to the real world. And it's just fascinating to see how people from completely different walk of lives, completely different cultures, completely different world experiences, and therefore completely different ways of thinking, still see the fundamental value drivers of Bitcoin just in a slightly different light. It's wonderful to think about. But you said something that triggered the nerd CPA in me, and I want to touch on this really, really quick before we jump off here. So, you touched on the Bitcoin ETF, and I think everyone in Bitcoin is aware of this, and I think even a lot of the masses are aware of this. But you also said FASB, and I know there was that recent FASB ruling that honestly did not get any real coverage in the Bitcoin community, and certainly did not get any coverage in the global mass media community. Explain to me really, really quickly, or rather to our audience, what is the FASB and what happened very recently that I actually believe is arguably bigger and more beneficial for Bitcoin and for crypto than even a Bitcoin ETF would be?
So there are accounting rules for what you can have on your balance sheet and how you can account for those assets on the balance sheet. And up till now, Bitcoin was declared as an indefinite intangible asset, which means that you can, when you buy Bitcoin for $10,000 and you buy it, and then it drops to $1,000 and then it skyrockets to $1 million, you need to account for your Bitcoin with $1,000. So you account for the Bitcoin with the lowest price which it ever had since you held the Bitcoin. And
this is impairment testing.
Exactly.
Typically what's done from an accounting perspective. If you bought it at $10,000, you carry it at the historical cost of the purchase. But when it's impaired in fair value or theoretical fair value to 1,000, you carry it at 1,000, even if it one day becomes worth 1 million.
Exactly. And that will cause a lot of confusion in the earnings call from public companies. And also the loss which you have from 10,000 to 1,000, they need to be accounted in the operating P&L of the company, which will cause further confusion. So it could be that you have Bitcoin worth $10 billion on your balance sheet. If you really have Bitcoin worth $10 billion, but it says that you just have $10 million, and your operating company does $10 billion in profit, but it looks like it only did $5 billion in profit because it got impaired by another $5 billion from your Bitcoin losses, which didn't even really happen. So it's a lot of confusion.
And I want to make clear the distinction between, and I want to make clear the distinction between the operating income and where investments would be, which is typically under what we would call other comprehensive income. It's not related to the operations of the company, but rather to the performance of financial assets. So you can have other comprehensive losses, but still have a very profitable operating company. But the way historically Bitcoin had to have been treated based on the accounting rules, it would be a loss in operating income. And it artificially portrays a unprofitable company, unfortunately.
It would be very difficult for investors to really analyze the worth of the business when it gets somewhat mudded by the strange accounting rules which Bitcoin had. And those changed now. And well, not now, but I think beginning 2024, you can change to fair value accounting, which basically is you take the price which Bitcoin has, just as you would account a stock. And at 2025, it's mandatory to account your Bitcoin position with fair value accounting. And I think it's very impactful because when you look at treasury theory of companies, it's very strange what happens there because of the inflationary currency, because like a company needs to grow its earnings per share by more than 7%. Otherwise, it would not make sense to invest in that company. So what can those companies do with the cash which they have in surplus? They can hold it in cash, but that's dilutive to the earnings per share. They can hold it in treasuries, but that's also dilutive because treasuries never do 7%. And the income from treasuries is taxable upon receival. So it's maybe now you get 4%, but that's 2.5%. So it's also dilutive. You cannot buy stocks because if you buy more than 30%, more than 40% of your treasury in stocks, you are a SEC 40 company and you get stripped of all your rights of an operating company.
You become an investment company subject to the 1940 Act. Exactly.
And real estate is not a good treasury asset because real estate is not very liquid. You cannot buy 20 million or 200 million worth of real estate every day and then liquidate 10 million worth of it in the next day. That is, it has a very low frequency of purchase and selling. So what do all those companies do? They go in debt and buy treasuries with debt. They give out dividends, maybe. They do share buybacks, like reduce the denominator of earnings per share. They do acquisitions. But these are all things which they are incentivized to do because of inflationary currency. And that's dangerous because dividends don't make sense because they get taxed on the corporate level and then get taxed on the investors level.
The double taxation, yeah.
Exactly. Share buybacks, I mean, you can do them, but
they make a little more sense. I mean, we've gone away from dividends from a best practice in corporate governance perspective and more towards share repurchases. But you only do that if you feel the excess cash you have you can't exceed your cost of capital, right? So if you can't exceed that 7-8%, then you do the share repurchase. Or, I mean, so I think share repurchases are inevitably going to get faded out over time, specifically because I think you're going to start to see new investment opportunities, not necessarily acquisition opportunities, but new investment opportunities. And Bitcoin might be one of them. Bitcoin might be the flagship one, where you can park your cash for future growth opportunities as they arise, but still be managing that cash behooven to your fiduciary of your shareholders.
Yep, exactly. And I mean, right now, everything you do with the treasury is done leveraged because of the inflationary currency. So normally when you have an operating company with the treasury should protect you in bad times. But if your treasury is leveraged, you have a lot of debt payments. And if a crisis comes and you cannot service the debt payments, the treasury is the component of your company which kills the whole company. And that's basically the reverse of what a treasury should actually do. And with Bitcoin, it's the first time where you have a commodity asset which does not have the defects of a commodity, because it's infinite, it's finite and not inflatable. A commodity is always inflatable. If the price of gold triples, a lot of gold will be mined tomorrow, and the price will come down. If the price of wheat quadruples, a lot of wheat will be produced tomorrow, and the prices will come down. And you don't have that with Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is basically real estate in cyberspace, where there's 21 million plots. I think Michael Saylor was the first to come up with this analogy. And you can buy it as a treasury reserve asset. It has a compound annual growth rate of, I don't know, maybe 50 to 60%. So the likelihood that you will exceed your 7%, which is required, is quite high. And you can have it on a positive balance sheet and not on a negative balance sheet. So in times of crises, you have a well-capitalized company. And I think, that is very, very valuable. And a lot of money is stored in companies. So I think it will be quite an interesting catalyst. And I think the biggest catalyst will be, now that CFOs can think about it, they will think about it. And it only takes
that's the point here.
Yeah. And it only takes, like, I don't know, Tim Cook to announce, and Tim Cook holds Bitcoin personally. And if he announces that 10% of their treasury or 5% will be converted into Bitcoin, it's like a how do you say it in English? Like a endowment of the asset from the highest authority. And I think that's interesting.
And I think we're in a period of inflation that the West hasn't seen for 40 something years, right? Yeah. We in the United States, we almost touched double digit inflation. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever number they put out there, double or triple it. And that's the actual truth, right? So we have seen double digit inflation as far as I'm concerned.
I agree.
What has happened is this has led the Fed to hike rates at a faster rate, the ECB to hike rates at a faster rate than at any point in history. And what has happened is that the assets that are typically used for treasuries, typically by banks, they've basically become not only losing value, they're almost becoming worthless, because these low yield bonds, the 10-year bonds yielding 2 to 3%, you're now, because you have to mark these to market, you're losing a substantial amount of money on these. And that's what led to the collapse of SVB. That's what led to the collapse of Silvergate, a couple of the other large banks. And it probably is going to lead to the collapse of a lot of treasuries, the collapse of corporates, and the collapse of more banks. I think we're going to start to see that, and we're going to see consolidation. Because of that, I think now with these new accounting rules, and this is why I said I think it will be more meaningful overall than a Bitcoin ETF is, we now have the ability for corporates and for banks to better shore up their balance sheet than low yield treasuries that they've historically been investing in. And I think once you start to see the infrastructure and the regulatory environment clear up a little bit, which will happen over the course of the next coming years. It's inevitable. It might happen over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. So it might happen quicker than we even anticipate. It might even happen next year because the accounting rules have changed and the ETF is coming. I think we're going to see a monumental rip in Bitcoin that is going to pale in comparison. I mean, everything that's happened thus far will pale in comparison to where we're going to be going with this.
I hope it takes longer so that I can stack more.
You want to acquire more Bitcoin, yeah?
Exactly. Exactly.
I don't blame you.
I have one more thing I wanted to say on this podcast. Today in the morning, I was writing a tweet and I didn't finish it, but I have the thought in my head. So I want to say it here. It's about the intrinsic value of Bitcoin. And a lot of, even of my physicist friends, they always come with the argument that Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. And I think the conventional investment wisdom about intrinsic value is a fallacy. And if you follow that wisdom, you would have missed every good investment since 2010. And they are about to do the same mistake with Bitcoin again. And therefore, I think it's maybe valuable to lose a couple of sentences about intrinsic value. And I think if intrinsic value would be the main factor for determining a store of value asset, then assets like steel would be more valuable than gold, or oxygen, which has the highest intrinsic value, would be the investment of the century, but neither hold true. And I think the question is, what drives an investment thesis of a store of value asset if it's not intrinsic value? And I think the answer is it's not the intrinsic value, but it's the properties. Because if you look at the name store of value, it already implies that you hold the value in your hand and you need a storage of that value. So you have the value in your hand and you need a container to store that value. And when thinking about intrinsic value, that it's useful for things you consume, for things you can consume. If I have like a piece of bread here and another piece of bread here, and I want to see which bread shall I eat, I'll maybe ask for the intrinsic nutrients, for the intrinsic calories or whatever. That makes sense, flavor. But not for all the flavor, but not for a store of value. For a store of value, I need a container with the best properties. Imagine this house would burn. I'm looking for a room which is fireproof to put myself, which is the intrinsic value, into that room. And I don't give a fuck about the intrinsic value of the room. I try to look at the properties of the room. Is it durable? Is it fireproof? And the same is with basically anything which functions as a container. Like if you go scuba diving, would you put your precious air, which has intrinsic value, would you put it in a steel tank or would you put it in a wooden tank? Is more value stored in IP addresses or is more value stored in pieces of paper? And I think the pattern, like with all the things I just said, the pattern is very clear for storage devices. And I think store of value is obviously a storage device. It's the best properties which are interesting, not the intrinsic value, because the intrinsic value is that what you hold. And then if you just think from first principles about what are the best properties of a store of value asset, and just think about it from the basic level. If you could design the perfect store of value, I would say it needs unlimited capacity. I want to put $1 of my value inside of it, but I want to put also $1 billion inside of it. I want it to be indestructible. I want it to have no leakage per design, no inflation. I want to be able to send energy from me to you and to any other, and also to Matt in a matter of minutes without losing the value. I want it to be transportable and portable as small as possible. Not even as small as possible. I want it to be portable in my head, so that's invisible for my enemies. and I want that foreign entities cannot control it. That for me would be the perfect store of value container where I would put a lot of my money into it. And basically all of these points are fulfilled with Bitcoin. And then if you argue, yeah, well, okay, I understand Bitcoin has cool properties. I want to put a bit inside of it, but stocks, they are also a container with nice properties. Okay, you cannot send them from A to B, but they have intrinsic value. But then I would say the stocks which performed best in the last decades were stocks which all deal with stuff which does not have intrinsic value. And these are the FANG stocks. They all share the same theme. They dematerialize stuff without intrinsic value, and they dematerialize stuff with intrinsic value and turn it into something without intrinsic value. Without intrinsic value, but with better properties. Netflix dematerializes DVDs and turns it into IP addresses. Google dematerializes libraries, all the libraries in the world which have a lot of intrinsic value, and turns them into IP addresses. Facebook dematerializes friendships and turns them into IP addresses. And now what about Bitcoin? I think Bitcoin dematerializes money and turns it into a fixed set of 21 million IP addresses. And that is basically Bitcoin created a scarce real estate in cyberspace without intrinsic value, but with the best properties so that every other store of value will pale in comparison, and every other scuba diver with their wooden tank will look at me with my steel tank and will want to put their precious air also into my steel scuba tank. And I think that is a concept worth acknowledging when thinking about the intrinsic value, and then thinking, okay, I need to look at the property because it's a store of value, and a storage device needs the best properties so that the intrinsic value, which I already have, can be put inside of it.
I mean, I don't have anything further to add to that. That was just so unbelievably eloquently put in a way that I've never considered before, because we always have that argument about what the intrinsic value of Bitcoin is. Reframing that, saying, okay, maybe there is an intrinsic value, but the properties of it is what makes it intrinsically valuable. That's a fascinating concept that I've never conceived of before. Florian, that was an enlightening conversation. I apologize that we've gone over a little bit of time, but I could actually have this conversation forever, because I'm going to need to invite you back on at some point, because I would love to discuss Henry Ford's hypothesis of energy conversion into money, why energy is the best form of money on Earth. And I would love to hear your thoughts on why Bitcoin might encapsulate that well. So we're going to need to get you back on for a complete another conversation in the near future.
I love it. Let's
thank
do
you
it.
Everyone for turning into the Proof of Words podcast. That was Florian Bruce, and an enlightening conversation, sir.
Thank you, Pat. It was awesome. See you soon.
We'll see you soon, brother. Have a good one.